Hello everyone, we're going to get started now. I'm Brian Kane with the QAI Global Institute and I'll be your host and moderator. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Top 10 Attitudes to Abolish When Adopting Agile with Gil Broza. We're excited you're able to join us today and set aside an hour to participate. We hope you find this session insightful and look forward to hearing your feedback, which I'll speak about more in a moment. This webinar is the second in a series of free webinars featuring leading Agile coaches and experts in advance of the Agile Trek Symposium on November 9th in Toronto, Ontario. This exciting event takes place immediately following the Test Trek 2012 Software Testing Symposium and features a full day of interactive sessions and conversations around Agile software development. The Agile Trek Symposium provides an open exchange for thought leaders and practitioners at all levels to share their experiences and learn proven Agile methods. Featured topics this year include transformation, Agile estimation, user stories, teams, testing, and much more. I encourage you to visit the event website at www.qaiagiletrek.org to learn more about this exciting event. Online, you can read session abstracts, learn more about the Agile coaches and experts that will be facilitating discussions, and learn about special promotions for attendees that register early. Mark your calendars now to also join us for the next webinar in this series, How Do Roles Transition in an Agile Environment, with Tom Cagley of the David Consulting Group on October 16th. Registration is also available for November's free webinar, The Essential Product Owner, Partnering with the Team. Learn more about both by visiting Agile Trek online at www.qaiagiletrek.org and clicking on the Webinar Series button. Today's webinar is hosted by the QAI Global Institute, one of the most recognized names in workforce training and professional development for IT, QA, and testing professionals. If you've not already, please be sure to visit us online to learn about upcoming expert-led training courses, popular conferences, and globally recognized software certifications. Especially of note are upcoming public training courses in both Canada and the US. Join us November 5th and 6th in Toronto, Ontario for either the Essentials of Software Testing course or QAI's exclusive Manager Solutions workshop. Then, in Washington, D.C., November 13th through 16th, we're offering courses that focus specifically on Agile and also test automation and engineering. Learn more about these upcoming training opportunities by visiting the QAI Global Institute online. You can find course information and registration for both the Toronto and DC courses either at qaiusa.com or qaicanada.org. Before we get started today, I want to quickly go through a few housekeeping notes to ensure we have a great webinar. As noted before, when you registered, you can either listen via your computer speakers or dialing in with the provided phone number. Either way, your microphone or phone will be automatically muted. The only audio that you'll be hearing today will be coming from the presenter. If you experience any technical issues during today's webinar, you can find immediate assistance by visiting GoToWebinar's support page at support.citrixonline.com. This page includes troubleshooting instructions for most major technical issues, including audio problems. If you're having problems hearing using your audio on your computer today, we do recommend that you try dialing in with your telephone to listen to the presentation. Today's speaker will take time at the end of the presentation to field select questions based on time. You can submit your question to the speaker at any time, though, during the presentation by using the questions box in your GoToWebinar application window. Select questions that are not able to be answered during the live webinar will be posted online for discussion in the QAI Global Institute's LinkedIn group later this week. We invite all of you to join the QAI Global Institute LinkedIn group to participate in the follow-up discussion. For those of you wishing to review today's presentation later or even to share it with colleagues, a recording of this webinar will be available for on-demand viewing by tomorrow afternoon. You can find this recording by visiting Agile Trek online, again at www.qaiagiletrek.org, and clicking on the Webinar Series button. When you close GoToWebinar at the conclusion of today's event, you'll be prompted with a quick 10-question webinar evaluation survey. We strive to make these events as relevant and as engaging as possible, so please take a moment, let us know your feedback through that form. As an added bonus to today's webinar, each participant will also receive QAI Global Institute's email news with information on future webinars, upcoming training opportunities, and conference news from QAI Global Institute. Be sure to add info@qaiworldwide.org as an approved email address to your email account so that it doesn't get mislabeled as junk. You can always manage your subscription or unsubscribe using the links found in any of the emails that we send you. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Agile coach and author Gil Broza is a featured Agile Trek 2012 expert. We're excited to have Gil speak both at Agile Trek and in today's webinar because his focus on people and teamwork has helped even the toughest cases embrace Agile effectively. In the last decade alone, Gil has consulted with over 40 companies in North America and Europe, where he trained and coached over 1,500 software professionals to start Agile, do Agile, and ultimately be Agile. He's an all-arounder, working at all organizational levels and mentoring people in technical, managerial, and leadership behaviors. He's an author of the most recently published and practical book, The Human Side of Agile, which helps Agile team leaders guide their teams to greatness. On the home front, he's the proud dad of 9-year-old twins who constantly teach him about communication and collaboration.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Can you hear me all right? Well, I guess you can. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to my talk, Top 10 Attitudes to Abolish When Adopting Agile. Thank you all for being here. As you've heard in the introduction, the focus of my work over the past 10 years has been to help teams and companies use Agile methods effectively. I've had the good fortune to work with some fabulous organizations. Maybe some of you belong to them, like Autodesk and Oracle and CPPAB. And the awareness I want to share with you today comes from really all of them, how important it is to succeed on really the human side. And this will be important for your success in any method, especially one based on the Agile principles. Now, I started my career in software development 21 years ago in a waterfall environment. I'm not going to give you a whole biography, but just enough so you can see where I am coming from. In university, they only taught me software design and coding. Okay, but when it came to actual product development, which is what we all do, my first exposure was actually at work for a startup incubator in Israel. That's where I grew up. So I learned the methods by doing as well as by watching all the bright people on my team and the good managers I worked with. We built wonderful stuff together. I watched my managers interact with others and leading meetings and all of that, and waterfall made sense. But something felt wrong. We had status meetings. Okay. Sounds reasonable, but they were boring and they felt pointless. We were all friendly, but siloed. One guy came back from vacation. I remember this like it happened yesterday. He wasn't even on my team. He threw a fit when he realized that somebody had touched his code. Somebody had the guts to fix a bug in his code while he was away for 3 weeks, but he flew off the handle. Every piece of code we wrote was idiosyncratic, and what's worse, nobody was actually buying this stuff. The quote you see here, "We keep our masterpieces in the museum's basement," that's from our CTO and founder. We built excellent stuff and nobody was buying it. So I could actually tell that little in this actually had to do with our methods, with our siloed sequential method. These were really attitudes towards work. It was an attitude to how we were building stuff and how we were doing it together and who we were reaching out to. And the thing was, we considered all of this normal. For instance, it was perfectly normal to own your code, right? Even to this day, in companies that don't do that, don't do Agile, it is considered normal. So anyway, then I moved to Canada. And now I got to experience the death march, staying evenings and weekends in the office and triaging hundreds of bugs. And again, I had this interesting team experience. We liked each other, okay? But I could never rely on my teammates to pull through on my behalf. So in addition to these normal attitudes that weren't helping, I also noticed that my colleagues just weren't terribly enthusiastic about the work. It was just a well-paying but stressful job to them, and that was disheartening. We all came into this profession loving it, and it kind of got beaten out of us. But then I became management. Okay, now I figured I can fix things around here. I'll do them my way. Okay, make a difference. Now, I actually knew nothing about management at the time, so I took courses, people management, project management, and so on. And I found myself talking to people a whole lot more. And then I found it actually had a name. This was called Management by Walking Around, MBWA. So with my developers and testers, we had daily check-ins because the weekly ones were suddenly too far apart. We'd also just hired a product manager, and I started coordinating work with them on a weekly basis. That was unheard of. Until one day, the VP of development was visiting from overseas, and she saw me talking to him. His name was Adam. And she pulled me aside later and asked, what were you guys talking about? And so I explained the process we'd worked out. And she got red in the face. Okay, she's shorter than me, but she has presence. She started yelling at me. You don't take any direction from him. He's a nobody. If you need to know something, you come to me. So, as you can well imagine, this was demoralizing. Didn't even make sense. I mean, what kind of attitude is this? We're building a product and I can't talk to the product manager? Just didn't make any sense. Those of you who have already come to know how I operate would, of course, guess correctly that I kept doing it anyway. Anyway, after the company downsized, probably unrelated to this, I discovered extreme programming. And all of a sudden, it was like somebody had opened the window and fresh air was coming in. I was allowed to talk to the product manager. Imagine that. I was sitting in an open space. I could actually see the other people I was working with. Started even noticing process. A later move landed me in another managerial position in a pharmaceutical company. Now, they were all rigid processes, standard operating procedures, and document this and document that, which for their work made perfect sense, but in software, maybe less so. So I was able to demonstrate results with my crazy XP method, so they kind of let me be. But it was kind of scary. Okay? I never knew when a new manager would come in and just decide to sort of restore order. Okay, but it all worked out. We loved it. We owned our work. My little team delivered software and tools repeatedly and reliably, and we just rocked. Anyway, 2004, I grew tired of downsizing. Happened 3 times at that point. And also I grew tired of being called a resource. So I chose to share my blessing, and I became a full-time mentor and consultant. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So I've perfected my system, I call it adaptive, to really take people and teams and companies from wherever they are, step by step, to having effective, humane, and responsible methods for developing software-based products. And this talk is the result of years of conversations and trainings and coaching with people just like you. Agile is everywhere now. I'm sure you hear about it all the time. There are hundreds of you on the call. Okay, I know this is a hot topic. Some people want it for the culture and the mindset. Others just want it for cheaper, better, faster. I respect both, but whatever the reason, I see a lot of people also resisting it, both consciously and subconsciously. Maybe they're applying the standard approach. Maybe they learned it in Certified Scrum Master, and they try to shoehorn it into their existing structures. Or maybe they just do business as usual, only iteratively and with larger teams and with the stress and anxiety of the demo every 2 weeks. Or they just disagree with parts of Agile, and so they kind of mix and match of what they think are the best parts of their current methodology and Agile. So I'm sure you've seen examples of this for yourself, and perhaps someplace inside you are not quite sure about this whole Agile philosophy and the value system, and maybe you just really, really like a set of best practices and a universal process for SDLC. I'm sorry to say that's not going to work. So if what I just said struck a chord for you, let me just further make sure that you're in the right place with me today. This talk was designed for project managers and Scrum Masters and managers, functional managers, coaches, other leaders in an Agile team context. If you have already started applying Agile, this talk will help you reflect on your implementation and adjust it. And if you haven't started yet, it will help you get started on a stronger footing. And you're especially in the right place if you're already recognizing that process mechanics alone just don't cut it. I fully believe that you will improve the results you're getting from Agile considerably if you truly adopt its mindset, and specifically if you transform your attitudes and approaches to those aligned with Agile. Now, the ones we'll talk about today, the particularly tricky ones, are what I call holdover attitudes. So these are approaches and behaviors that you had back in back in Waterfall, and Waterfall portion of your career, and they served you well, but now with some form of agility, they no longer do. And I say that they're tricky because they're probably so well ingrained, so habitual, that you no longer notice them. And therefore, you probably don't notice the effect they're having on your performance and on your team's performance. And this is really what we'll do today. I'll point out the 10 holdover attitudes that I encounter most often. And as I describe them, ask yourself, is that how I operate? Is that something I also believe? You'll understand the effect that they have, and you'll learn powerful techniques and mindset that you can embrace instead. It truly is my goal for you to start a mindset shift today, to sort of crack the concrete, if you like, to increase your awareness of how you operate so you can choose to change it. And I want to give you awesome value today. So after we get through the 10 attitudes, if you recognize yourself in some of them and you want to continue experiencing my way of enabling agility, I'll make sure to show you how we can go further together. Now, to do this, we are going to pretend to visit an Agile team who's developing an HR management system. Don't worry about details. There's not going to be any domain information here whatsoever. And we're going to do this in a silent movie style. Okay. And our first stop is going to be iteration planning. We're actually going to visit them throughout an iteration. So as you know, in iteration planning, the team gets together and they figure out the plan for the upcoming 2 or 3 weeks, whatever the cycle length is. And our PO, product owner, is saying, all right, guys, it is time to get to that big payroll analysis feature. We've seen it coming. Now, you estimated it at a few weeks of work. Clearly, it won't fit. How can we decompose it? Right? Valid question. That's how we do. We decompose big work into small work so we can fit it in iterations. So the team thinks about this, and then they say, you know, we could start by producing payroll analysis results in text form. So we'll hold off on graphs and trends. Maybe we'll do those next iteration. I don't know. But this alone will take 1 iteration. Okay. Now, Scrum Master knows that that's a risk. And he says filling up an iteration with a single large story is quite risky, right? So can you find an even smaller piece there? And they keep talking, okay? But the product owner doesn't agree. So, sorry. There's just no value in splitting it any further. I'm sure many of you have heard this before, but you know what? That is your attitude number 1. The attitude says that it has to be large to matter. A valuable solution is by necessity a large solution. What happens when you have that is you delay and you lengthen your feedback loops, right? You actually have to wait a while until you turn out the feature and you can start getting feedback about it from everybody, really, from your customer, from potential users, from stakeholders, from even team members. But then the question is, well, why does this linger? Okay, why does this attitude even linger? Shouldn't we have just, kissed it away when we move to Agile? Well, one reason it lingers is simply habit. That's how we've always done stuff, right? If you think back to, big projects, stuff you used the Gantt chart for, the bars were kind of long. I remember sitting on a reporting engine for 2 months before I even checked it in. It just didn't make any sense to do this piecemeal. Nowadays, I shudder at the thought, but that's what I thought at the time. The other reason it lingers is simply education. You know what? I've coached, I think, over 50 teams at this point, and almost without fail, one of the first things I need to do with them, the guidance I need to provide, is how to turn big work into small work, because they just don't know. They've never done this. And even if it happened, somebody else did it, maybe a manager. A third reason is beliefs. We may believe that if we turn out something that is partial, it may, put us in a bad light. It may look half-baked or just bad. I'm reminded of Google Docs. Google was not afraid to put out Docs in the first incarnation, which looked horrible, but you could use it. You could use it to do some basic online collaboration, writing of documents, and you could use it, but it really looked bad. If it hadn't been Google, I don't know if they would have continued to use it. I figured, they'll improve over time. So many companies find themselves in this bind. How low can we go? And the last reason is technology. If you're working in a, let's say Java or .NET environment, it gets relatively easy to partition things. But if you're working in a legacy environment or C, C++, you do some hardware, then you may believe that technology limits you. And to an extent, it does. Probably to a smaller extent than you believe, though. Anywho, what do you do instead? Okay, so how do you shift out of this attitude? The best technique I know is called evolutionary design. Now, this is not something that was explicit in the early Scrum and XP literature. Really, this concept of building features and entire programs from the inside out. You find the core, a little bit that is still valuable, it reduces some of your risk, you get some feedback on it, you do that. Then you build the next layer of the onion, so to speak, not the layer of code, but the another layer of functionality and usability and experience into this, and you get feedback about that. And you constantly refactor so what you have still makes sense and works well. But really, a critical piece to make this work is to understand value. Okay, and when I say understand value, I'm really talking about when we say stories. Stories have value to the customer, but what is value? It's not just dollars. It's not just customers. It could be word-of-mouth referrals. It could be less risk. It could be a bunch of things. So what is value to you? One of the earliest exercises I do with teams is chartering. And one of the things we do in chartering is understanding what value is. And we do this by understanding the conditions of success for a project and saying, well, if this is what it means to succeed, then now we know what is in and what is out, what is valuable and what is less valuable. And it has us take a business standpoint. This is very important. Again, if you're used to seeing Gantt charts, for instance, they're all about the doing. Okay, they're all about the tasks. If you look at some sprint plans in Agile, they're all about the tasks, what teams need to do. And what I'm saying here is even in those plans, you need to take a step back and say, okay, so these tasks, what difference will they make? What sort of value will we derive from them? And this is very important because this is one of the drivers of success in Agile. You do less of what matters less. And so if you take a business standpoint of how do we make a difference, how do we fill need, how do we solve a problem, this is when it gets really powerful, really, really powerful. And I have entire teams embrace this standpoint. It's not just the product owner. And one vehicle for that is to write proper stories. By the way, it's not really part of this presentation, but if you're interested in a quick, concise guide to doing your stories effectively, you can go to a site I have. It's called userstories.info, and you can download this guide. I call it Close the User Stories Gap, and it will help you write proper stories and address some of the really thorny areas there. So userstories.info. Anyway, moving on. We're still in iteration planning, right? Because they need to look at several stories. It doesn't end, in 15 minutes. And Scrum Master says this. It looks like we're going to have a task here to enhance the service layer. Okay, fair enough. Dave is our service layer expert. Okay, so I imagine he'll do the task. So Dave is over by the phone playing with his iPhone, and we're asking, well, Dave, what's your estimate? And Dave says, oh, I don't know, 2 weeks. But the attitude started a lot earlier. The attitude started when we wanted to assign work to Dave. Dave is our task expert. Yes, he knows the service layer best. By assigning work to Dave early on in the iteration, actually, it hasn't even started, it's still in planning, we have just used attitude number 2. What we've done is we've perpetuated the silo. Dave is a silo. Okay, chances are very few others actually know how to work with the service layer, but by assigning work to Dave this way, we will not make things any better. And what we've also done, and this usually goes unstated, we've actually perpetuated a little bit more the pecking order, because if we're talking about a very important component of the code, and who knows, maybe the service layer is, then the person who works on it is slightly more important than others. Okay, and everybody on the team knows that. Yeah, they do. What we've also done is we've reduced even further the lottery number. You may know this by the more morbid term bus number or truck number. How many people can you lose on the project? Let's say they win the lottery. For the project to just die, just dies on the vine. Okay, and when you have those task experts, you need them, but at the same time they're a risk, right? We perpetuate tunnel vision. And of course we perpetuate integration pains, because when Dave is done with his service layer and Joe is done with the UI and Sally is done with the server, they're all done at different points in time. One takes 3 days, one takes 8, one takes 5. When do they integrate? When do they fix the bugs? We run out of time and iteration is only 2 weeks. Okay? And that's how you slip iterations. If you want to see where your teams consistently do not get to done on an iteration, then assigning work to task experts is the first place to look. It is the first and worst risk factor in not completing iteration plans. Okay, so you start with iteration. Let's say you estimate. Let's say your estimates are even fairly decent. In most cases, they're not. Sorry, that's just the common standard. And still, you get to the demo. Not everything is done. Some may not even be started. Look at assigning work to task experts. They become bottlenecks. Okay, we overload them. They can't help others. Others can't help them. But why do we still do that? Okay, why does this attitude linger? Again, habit. We've always done that. Okay, it always made sense, didn't it? Right? How do you build expertise? Well, through practice, right? But it also results from pigeonholing. Just look at any old job description. I need somebody who is a jQuery expert, and that guy will do all the jQuery. Okay. Now, expertise takes time to build, and sometimes the practice opportunities are limited. I fully realize that. But this is the way to get into trouble. Another reason is beliefs. We believe that the expert will do this in the fastest and best way. And quite often, that's right. But what also happens in many situations is that it doesn't actually matter. Because what does matter is for the team to finish their shared obligations together. Not for each individual member to finish his or her obligations. Okay, because then you have to integrate, right? So by always assigning work to our best and fastest, again, we don't share expertise and we don't even allow collaboration. Collaboration actually stops meaning anything. And of course, there's the perennial sense of urgency. I bet that 99% of you listening to me right now are operating under some sort of sense of urgency. Whether it is real or not, the teams feel it. The teams work to it. Okay, so what do you do instead? How do you work around this? Well, the books told you to have true team ownership of deliverables. No, they meant it. Now, what does this actually mean? It means that the team as a group have the shared goal of delivering the project. Within the iteration, they have the goal of delivering on the iteration goal. And they're doing the best they can to deliver on what went into the iteration plan. But they own it together. And that means that they will help each other. They will, in fact, self-organize to meet those obligations. It's not enough to say, guys, when you need to talk to each other, just go ahead and do that, because it doesn't necessarily happen. What does need to happen is a strong leadership, especially in the early days, to actually impress upon them that they're in this together. The overall organizational framework needs to actually back this up. If you have individual objectives, for instance, and they have to do with project obligations, then that's going to be very difficult. That's just one example. One mechanism for this is to encourage co-development. You might call this pair programming, or sometimes it is swarming, or it's called also mob programming. It's when you say, you know what, it's not about the typing, it's just a bunch of people get together. They have in their collective minds how to solve the particular task they're on today, and among them, they'll finish it. They'll work it out. They'll figure out how to do this, and we don't need to manage them to do this. That means letting go a little bit. It's scary. But to support them in that, you also need to build the team's capabilities. So there's a whole lot of learning that needs to take place. Pairing, by the way, is one mechanism for helping people learn from each other. Another is send them off to training, buy them the books, let them practice on new areas, okay? Because this is how you manage risk. It's one of the basics of management responsibilities. Still in iteration planning, the team is saying, look, there's this Jabberwocky framework, and we're going to have to reuse a bunch of stuff from it, okay, with some adaptation, okay? But we can't really do this entirely correctly ourselves. We need to talk with Mike. He's the architect. He knows Jabberwocky perfectly. Together we'll do it right. That's really nice, says Dan, but Mike is already booked. He's the architect. He is in high demand. He's already booked for 3 other projects this iteration. So this just It's going to have to wait. I don't know if you ever hear discourse like this in your workplace, but I call this attitude number 3. So there's a limiting factor, and there's just nothing you can do about it. Nothing whatsoever that you can do about it. Like waiting at the airport and the flight is delayed. The trouble with this is that it fosters cynicism. Okay? It encourages local optimization. That means that the team is going to try to maximize what they can do on their own, absent Mike. And they will do all sorts of things to optimize for their case. But really, if you think about it, they can't go too far ahead. And the problem here is really organizational. It's not actually a team problem. It has to do with the fact that the organization as a whole is a bit understaffed in one particular function, in this case, architecture. And what it also does eventually is it limits growth because they just won't try, right? Why does this thing linger? Okay, this attitude lingers mostly due to organizational structure. This one is going to figure in many attitudes, I already warn you. The organizational structure is typically hierarchical. It's typically siloed, functional, whatever you want to call it. In most organizations, when they consider Agile, they don't switch to Agile with its standing teams, with team leaders. Instead, they graft Agile onto their existing structures. And the two are, well, in conflict, okay, because Agile teams aren't quite a matrix, okay? They aren't quite a strong matrix or a weak matrix. Well, they're more one than the other, but it's still a little different, okay? And I run into so many teams where, yeah, they brought in developers and testers and the BAs, and they put them together, but the architects and the DBAs and all the highly specialized people, they're elsewhere. They have their own bosses, they have their own organization, their own timeline. Maybe they use ITIL instead of Agile. It's a whole different thing. And so now you manage people on 2 different timelines. Okay? What happens in the team now is a feeling of helplessness. Okay? There's just so much we can do. No. And this is not the can-do attitude that you'd like to foster, right? So what can you do instead? Instead, you want to empower the teams enough. Sometimes we talk about team autonomy. Well, Agile team autonomy is actually a little limited. It's not full autonomy. They can't totally rule themselves, but we do need to give them enough responsibility to carry out their work meaningfully. So in this case, for instance, maybe we can make some sort of departmental agreement as to the sort of things that the teams can do on their own if the architect is unavailable. Maybe they can even shadow the architect on a few occasions to learn from him. So when the need arises, 9 times out of 10, they will be able to solve the need on their own without the architect's blessing. Okay, that is empowerment, but they need the skills for this. What we're doing by this way, okay, by relieving the pressure, okay, relieving the bottleneck, is we are making it possible to optimize locally, because now we took the pressure off the architect to be everywhere and to be everything for everyone. So optimizing globally is very powerful. If you're familiar with value stream mapping in Lean, that is an incredibly powerful technique to understanding where you need to optimize your overall value delivery chain. And you might find that it doesn't actually pay to optimize a specific team if you have bigger delays and bottlenecks in the overall chain. Now, another way to relieve the pressure is simply to add people. What this means is either you promote or you hire. A lot of managers frown on this advice and say, well, no, sorry, there's just no funds. But what usually goes unstated is that on the other side of the ledger, they waste a lot of money waiting and producing subpar solutions. Okay? So it's not just about explicit spending of money, it's also the unnoticed spending of money. Anywho, we're done with iteration planning, and we're going to proceed sometime during the iteration. You might think I'm rushing through the next ones, but actually I'm not. It's just because some of the culprits actually repeat. You'll notice. So sometime during the iteration, Tim walks over to his friend and said, hey, I'm waiting for the build to finish. That should be just under 30 minutes. Do you want to go for coffee? I don't know about you, but I've heard this particular phrase or variation thereof hundreds of times. I've said it myself hundreds of times. But you know what we call this? It's called attitude number 4. Those of you who happen to live in my first city, Toronto, would have come to know and love those accursed orange signs of construction. We have 2 seasons here, as you might know. Up in Canada, there is winter and there is construction. Now, the particular construction you see on the right is for a stretch of roadway which is 5 kilometers long, 3 miles. And the city is going to be replacing water mains for 2.5 years, and there's just nothing you can do about it. Things take long. That's just the way it is. So as a resident, all I can do is drive around this menace, which is what I've been doing, or complain about it, which I've also been doing. But that's just the way it is, right? You can't do anything about it. But if you have teams that say, you know what, things take long, the build takes 30 minutes, nothing you can do about that, it's just the nature of things. They are resigning themselves to persistent waste. Waste is any time you do something that doesn't add value. They're resigning themselves to limited productivity. Productivity is really a function of how much waste you have in the process. And why do we still do that? Well, sometimes it's the technology. If you're building C code, C++ code, you know what I'm talking about. Other times it's feature craving. That's when we have like a product owner who said, okay, I want this feature and that feature and the other feature. And the dev team says, dude, we kind of have to take care of the design along the way. We can't just demo stuff. It has to work under the hood. We say, no, there's pressure to ship. Okay, that's called feature craving. Other times it's simply ignorance. We don't actually know that builds can take less, or that automated tests can in fact run 100 of them per second. Okay, so some education is definitely in order. And lastly, it's disempowerment. I had a client team once where the platform group took care of the build. So the particular application team, they couldn't do nothing about it. If they wanted to add a folder to the directory, to what the build covered, they had to go ask. And the platform group was not happy to hear that. So to get rid of this attitude, you have to be merciless about eliminating waste and bottlenecks. And again, when I say waste, it's all the waiting and the relearning and the reworking. It's not the slack when people can stop and pause and think, like do a retrospective. It's stuff like the build taking 30 minutes. You want to pay down your technical debt. Right, so this is what we call, again, those design anti-patterns that thwart us. So those are code smells. When we have a lot of those, we have technical debt. We like owe money on our code to just get it up to par. And continuously improve. If you have teams that no longer quite do retrospectives, or maybe they shorten them to 15 minutes, because really, what's the point? You probably want to look into that again. Further, during the iteration, Judy comes over to Tom and asks him, hey, Tom, what are you up to? And Tom says, I'm refactoring the employee class. It's really hard to work with. What Tom is doing, he is actually removing some technical debt because, again, it's snarling him. It's preventing him from doing the work he needs to do, but Judy doesn't think so. She freaks out. Judy says, don't touch that. If it ain't broken, you don't fix it. Okay? And we call this attitude number 5, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Now, there might be things in life to which it applies usefully, but I don't think software is one of them. This is when you get into situations of blight, right? So we say inspect and adapt, right? It's one of the core Scrum principles. You get into a retrospective, for instance, to inspect and adapt your process, right? So refactoring is an act of inspecting and adapting your code to the needs. But if we do this to one but not the other, well, what's the point? Okay? It keeps that growing, and if you've ever re-architected a component or rewritten a big chunk of it, like this is usually like version 3 or version 5, because the old stuff just couldn't handle the new requirements anymore, that's technical debt. That's what you had there. It's basically getting very high levels of debt and declaring bankruptcy. That's essentially what it means. And what it also does, it allows fear to influence the process, right? I saw this once where a VP of product management started requiring sign-offs on all the stories. So she would sign off the stories from her product managers. There were like 10 of them in a 300-person group. It's like insane. That's a bottleneck, okay? And it was all due to fear, okay? Her personality was not the issue. It was simply fear of stuff, of wrong stuff getting in there, okay? And you can see here the reasons this attitude lingers, right? Again, we're afraid. Sometimes we're afraid of our code. I know it's silly to say that, but I don't remember what code I wrote a month ago looks like, and if it's 2 years old, I'm afraid to touch it. Now, nowadays using XP techniques like TDD, I'm far less afraid to touch it, but still, we sometimes grow afraid of our own code. When you don't refactor, when you let that grow, it really means that you're not investing enough in it. And even though you've produced it and you're getting ROI off the software and it's out there selling, you still need to maintain it. It's not just the obvious, library upgrades and license upgrades. It needs maintenance. It needs maintenance because the world around it moves forward. It doesn't wait. Okay? So what you need to do instead is take a good look at your code and all your work products and their foundations and understand the value that they have. They have intrinsic value, not just for how much they sell. Okay, I know people who left companies promising people, qualified, gifted people who just couldn't take working on the awful software they had there anymore. It was just too disheartening. I know a manager out in Waterloo. He told me a few years ago that his team was spending half their time merging code. Okay, so that's when you have branches and you bring them together. It's called merging code. They spend half their time on this. I don't know about you, but I didn't sign up for this. So, further through the iteration, we have the guys working, and all of a sudden the manager walks up and says, guys, you've been telling me how understaffed you were. So, say hello, this is Alex. We just hired him today for your team. Okay, happens, right? Boom. Attitude number 6, managers control team makeup. Now, you might ask yourself legitimately, shouldn't managers control team makeup? And I would say no. I would say they definitely influence and affect it, but I don't think they should control it. And the reason I think so is that if we want our teams to self-organize and we want our teams to be the best they can be, we cannot inflict members upon them. It has to be done in collaboration. It has to be done based on serious need. It has to be done with their involvement. Same with removing people from the team. So it's not like, you let them self-organize on picking tasks and doing estimates, but when it comes to their membership, all bets are off. It just doesn't work this way. The dissonance is too strong. Many of you probably know this curve. It's based on the Tuckman model of team evolution. And really what happens is anytime you bring a member into a team, let's say the team is performing, they're actually solid, they turn out good stuff, and now you bring in a new guy and they, not a day passes and they realize, what, we can't work with him. He's annoying. We can't sit next to him. Okay? He has his own idiosyncrasies. He writes code like nobody here. Yes, he looks good on LinkedIn, but you know what? Not with us. I know this happens to a lot of people. And again, this lingers due to the org structure. It's culture. It's how we've done things around here. And in many organizations, there's just limited respect for teams because really most teams in pre-Agile organizations are not really teams. They're really more like work groups. They are not mutually accountable. They don't actually have any interdependence to speak of. Okay? And now we bring Agile in, and now we're expecting people to sort of have each other's back. That's a big, big request. So as I said, involve the teams in determining their makeup. Our next stop is the stand-up meeting. Okay? And again, I'm not rushing through these. It's just because we are starting to repeat some of those. In the stand-up meetings, people really try to get unstuck, right? So it's Jen's turn, and Jen is saying, I worked on the first task in the taxable benefit story, so my part is done. Do you ever hear those 3 or 4 syllables, my part is done? If you live in a house, especially in my neck of the woods, it looks like this. And it's attitude number 7, where we say, everyone should focus on completing their own part of the work. That's why we hire them. That's what we're paying them for. Yeah, just everybody do their part. And that's what it looks like. You only mow up to the property line. It looks ugly. It's still on what looks like your lawn, but you did your bit. Okay. This attitude supports a task culture. So remember before we said value perspective as opposed to a task perspective. It's really very similar. So when you have a value culture, the team is passionate about delivering value and about making a difference and rocking the world and just, being awesome. Okay, I know this sounds a bit extreme and maybe not a lot of teams are like that, but it can be like that. I've worked in teams like that. When you have a task culture, on the other hand, everybody is focused on what we need to do. And this is important because you clearly have to do stuff to gain stuff. But it shouldn't be the focus. Okay, so when you look at the stickies on the board, on the planning board, and the swim lanes, or if you use Kanban as well, the WIP limits and all of that stuff, it's all about tasks. It's all about the doing. But really what matters is the getting to done. And in this case, it means that the whole grass is mowed. Doesn't matter who owns it, because this is how we'll make a difference. So just doing the service layer is useless if the rest is not done and integrated. Okay? When you do that, again, collaboration seems meaningless. It actually seems expensive. That's when people start saying, hey, what are these two people doing together on the same computer? Aren't we wasting time there? Aren't we wasting typing time? So why does this linger? Again, habit. That we pay people to do stuff. We have job descriptions for them. We have individual objectives. We ask them to do their stuff. This role myopia. Like this guy, I took a picture here. The guy has a license plate that says SQL DBA. Yeah. And I don't know why the guy paid $200 for this, but he's probably proud of it. Okay? And I'm guessing he probably doesn't do a lot of UIs. Okay? Now again, there's, you need to build expertise and you shouldn't just code anywhere because you happen to be a programmer. I get that. But still, there should be a get-to-done mentality. Okay? And that's a value culture. So instead, again, every story, but also every task are a team responsibility. If I start something and all of a sudden I get a fever, I have to go home. Maybe it can wait for tomorrow, or maybe not. If it can't, somebody else should pick it up because we're mutually accountable. So anyone who can participates. Work actually flows between us. It's legitimate. It's absolutely legitimate. It's even desirable. Now it's John's turn in the stand-up, and he's saying this, Scrum Master, what should they work on next? I'm sure a lot of you have heard this. I heard this only 2 weeks ago, actually. And I call this attitude number 8. And attitude number 8 is where a central authority decides what you should do next. In this case, the Scrum Master. So when you have that, again, you're damaging self-organization. Okay? You're damaging initiative. If people ask this question, it means that first, they need the answer, but also they're probably used to asking this question, which probably implies that unless the Scrum Master is around, they won't actually try to figure out their next task. Maybe they'll just coast or do whatever. And again, what you have here is you encourage local optimization. So rather than letting the group figure out its work and who does what when, we have a manager now, or Scrum Master, it doesn't matter, worry about this. And of course, he or she is a single person, therefore has limited access to information, needs to be around all the time. It's stressful. You know what this looks like. Okay, so that's local optimization. Again, culture, history, all of this stuff. This is how we've done it. And you know what? For some people, that's actually the preferred way to go. Every team I coach and train, there will be 1, 2, 3 people who actually like being told what to do. And once you tell them what to do, they'll execute it perfectly. You know what? Fine. As long as they are a small minority, that's fine. They will integrate nicely with the team as long as they do the rest of those things. I wouldn't worry about this too much. Okay? But it's something to pay attention to. Also, there is perceived efficiency. Right? Because the assumption was, it's really Taylorism, right? The assumption is that a manager has access to more information than everybody else, so the so the manager can divide work effectively and efficiently. Sip of water here. Yeah. And now it's Abby's turn. Abby's working on a defect analysis report. To which Dan says, really? This isn't anywhere on our backlog. How come you're doing that, Abby? And Abby says, well, my boss asked me for it. My boss is the QA manager. He asked me for it. So you know what's coming by now, right? Call this number 9. When managers have the last word. And again, you might be wondering if managers shouldn't have the last word. And well, it depends. It depends what the question is. For a question like a specific task that several people on the team can undertake, and there is a PO, a product owner, who takes care of the queue of important stuff, no, I wouldn't have the managers have the last word here. Managers take care of the big organizational stuff, okay, and the major organizational impediments, and the risks to progress and all that. But if you do, number 9, if managers do have the last word, you're undermining the team's empowerment, and actually you're undermining the entire planning process, because especially if they estimate tasks, especially those teams that do micro-estimation, like 2 hours of this and 4 hours of that, and somebody comes in and says, oh, no, let you do this report, and it takes, I don't know, 8 hours. Already they're dead in the water. So now they have to replan, and it doesn't work all that well. Again, the usual reasons. This is how we've done things. We brought Agile we grafted it onto the organizational structures where managers have the authority and the influence and the sanctioned power to make stuff happen by telling others what to do. And this doesn't sit all that well with Agile, so managers do have to step back. Yeah. All right. If you're wondering what to do in this particular case, by the way, it's called a backlog. The team should work from a single list. Okay, so bring those needs and priorities into the backlog. The team pulls them from the backlog based on priority and timeline. And again, you don't pre-assign them. It's like the Dave in the service layer from before. You don't pre-assign them. So maybe it's not Abby. Maybe it's somebody else who's available. Maybe it's a developer. Right? It doesn't have to be a tester. Our last stop is the review meeting. Yes, this is when the iteration is coming to a close and they're reviewing their stuff, and there's a collective sigh of relief, and it's almost over, sort of like this talk. We're done with the payroll analysis story, and the product owner asks the obvious question, so can we ship it? And you would imagine that the answer is yes, because they said that they're done, but unfortunately they're not, because the code's done. But the queries still need to be tuned, and the tech writers still need to do their magic. Okay, what comes after 9? 10. If it runs, it's ready. Yeah, if it runs, it's ready. So yeah, we have code, it runs. You could ship it right now. It will look like this computer without a case. But you could ship it. So what's going on here? What's going on here is that the team can't actually do the whole thing. They can do more than they could before. You know, developers used to work up to the fence called works on my machine, and testers would carry it from there and so on. Now the fence has moved, but they're still a bit limited in their ownership. They can't really turn out complete stuff. Clearly that reduces productivity, like I said before. Now those other people, DBAs and tech writers, that they have their own processes to worry about. Okay, they will come after. So you can optimize your Agile team until you're blue in the face, but there's still a tail to manage. And of course it causes fragmentation. Again, habit, org structure, culture, all the good stuff. This is how we do stuff around here. Okay, it also has to do with the fact that often these folks I mentioned actually belong to different organizational units. They have different bosses, different VPs. And I've been around companies where those VPs just could care less for Agile, and you know, devs, you manage. Yeah, we'll talk to you when you're done. So what you need to do instead is 2 things. One is you need to identify what's known as your project community. So that's really the entire Agile team, right? Delivery team, customers, product owner, and team lead, also known as Scrum Master, and all the stakeholders, including the managers that make a difference, big ones, yeah. And define effective done criteria. So it's a combination, because you want the team to be able to get to done, and the done should be a pretty far off fence. So, guys, these are the 10 attitudes we covered. Okay, they're just summarized up here. I'm not going to read them out again. Do you notice something about them? Okay, whenever I give this talk, some people tell me, "Oh, I have 5 of these," and nice, I only have 3 of them. And some say in a bit of a lower voice, close to 10. I guess I have some things to work on. But then, you know what, it's actually just fine. It's just fine, because if you think about them a little bit, you'll notice what's common to them. It has to do with why they linger. while you or your teammates still be having them. Okay? They have to do with fears and habits and beliefs and perceptions and personality. Okay? Org structure aside, right? They have to do with being human. You're not a machine, you're not a computer, or God forbid a resource. And now with awareness, you can choose to make changes. And what I've noticed is that when managers and teams have this attitude, they experience some common challenges with Agile. Here's one. Buy-in and commitment are limited. So the teams sort of go through the motions, but they're not really committed or engaged. Yeah? Like, comes the time for the Scrum meeting, they barely get out of their chairs. Okay? That's a good sign for low engagement. That's a human problem. Guys, it's not a process or technique problem. It's hard to know how well they work together, but you can tell it's not optimal. Now, collaboration and synergy, again, have little to do with process, or maybe there are these inhibiting factors that seem normal, like being distributed or siloed, or maybe some people just don't behave all that nice, and you just bite the bullet. Maybe you have members who don't fit. And it might also be that they still do the retrospectives, but nothing significant comes out of them. Okay, so chances are some people are even questioning the point of retrospectives. That's horrible, guys. So if these statements resonate with you, if they reflect your reality, here's one solution for you. This is a free training. It's by email. You don't need to pay a cent or leave your chair. I call this Something Happened on the Way to Agile. And the site for it is onthewaytoagile.com. This is help for the methodology side, not the people side. Every day for 20 days, you'll receive a training segment by email, and they're interleaved with follow-up mechanisms. What you see here on the slide are just 6 of those topics. Okay, 8 tips for effective retrospectives is a very popular one, and what do managers do in Agile is an especially popular one. So again, this is onthewaytoagile.com. And the solution I have for the trickier human side is my brand new book. Thanks, Brian, for mentioning it. It came out 2 weeks ago. It's my pride and joy. It's my baby. I have written this book with you in mind. Okay, you're my tribe, because when you consider the intersection of 4 domains, you can maybe picture a Venn diagram: software development, Agile, people, and delivery leadership. There used to be a gaping hole. I'm proud to say that I believe I've filled that hole with 300 pages of specific advice and stories, not theory. Okay, you have enough theory already. And this book will help you design your role for outstanding value and to grow a solid team, lead them as they collaborate and self-organize, and support their synergy, because that's the whole point of being a team. In a team, there's overhead, there's meeting and communication and some emotional energy, but you get that back because they're synergistic as a team. And chances are that in the next few years you'll be leading teams with varying levels of Agile dexterity. And with this book you can help all of them embrace change and the continuous improvement mindset. Guys, this is not a basic text. It assumes you already know a little bit about Agile, Scrum, whatever other method you use. Because really it's not a process problem, right? And if you stay with them, once they reach cruising altitude, it will show you how to sustain them for the long haul. The attitudes we covered today are just one part of the equation. Now, this book is available online in both print and electronic versions. It is not in brick-and-mortar stores. If you go to the site here, thehumansideofagile.com, you'll see the different links for buying in the US and in Canada, or the various e-formats. And that's it, friends. I hope this has been a valuable experience for you. I've had fun. I always love giving this particular talk. And over to you, Brian.
Great. Well, thank you, Gil, very much. And I just want to put in a plug for Gil's book that for the first 50 folks that are registering for Agile Trek, they're going to have an opportunity to receive one of those books. Very exciting. We're about out of time for today, so I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, Top 10 Attitudes to Abolish When Adopting Agile. We invite all of you to join the QAI Global Institute LinkedIn group to participate in the follow-up discussion online. We also invite you to join us again for other upcoming webinars on October 16th, How Do Roles Transition in an Agile Environment, and on November 14th, The Essential Product Owner, Partnering with the Team. This webinar itself has been recorded and will be made available at www.qaiagiletrek.org by tomorrow afternoon. If If you have any team members or colleagues you think you would have enjoyed this webinar, please encourage them to view it on demand by visiting that website. As you leave the webinar today, please take a moment to share your feedback on the session with us. There's a quick 10-question webinar evaluation survey that will automatically pop up when you close GoToWebinar. Your feedback helps us deliver quality webinars that help professionals. We'll now be closing the webinar and ending the recording, so thank you all for joining us, and please be sure to fill out that webinar